Our guest is in the studio, the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury and Economic Planning, Professor Njuguna Ndung'u. Karibu sana. To welcome you to the conversation, City has the day's proverb. Every week, City goes across Africa, picks one country, and then looks at proverbs from that country. So listen to this proverb, and you'll give us your interpretation of it.
Yeah.
City?
Yes, our proverb is a simple, straightforward one. Really not so simple and not so straightforward. But
From?
the country of Eric, as Eric says, South Sudan. Is that okay,
Wow.
Eric? Okay.
South Sudan.
South Sudan, yes. Do not talk to the bush that has not been burnt.
Okay.
Do not talk to the bush that has not been burnt.
Okay. So the bush is not savory. So you need to talk to the bush when it is savory. When it is empty. Because when you burn it, it's empty. So, okay. When you are talking to it when it is burnt, then you are actually trying to give it hope that it will wake up tomorrow. Okay. Very interesting.
Hey, that's an interesting
I had not
perspective.
considered that myself.
Me neither.
I had not considered. I think I've heard it for the first time. But of course, proverbs are supposed to give us some wisdom in terms of interpretation.
Yes.
And that's why my culture. I'm from I'm from Muranga, and we of course talk Kikuyu, deep Kikuyu, and proverbs are part of the game.
Yeah.
But if you don't know how to even to interpret the content, then you can miss out because it elaborates more than what you say. Yeah.
It's not just the face value.
No, it's
the
not
top
just
level
face value.
words.
Yeah.
It goes deeper than this.
Yeah.
Prof, you're the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury and Economic Planning. You are an academic. You have held the position of Governor of the Central Bank of Kenya. That's the first time when the whole country came to interact with you. But then people don't know, what were you doing before CBK? What have you been doing since CBK before the National Treasury?
Thank you very much. And let me say, I started my career teaching economics at the University of Nairobi way back in 1987. And steadfastly I've done that, but not just teaching, because from 1989 I started teaching graduate students. So it means that graduate students, when you're teaching graduate students, you also become a researcher. And you can see that most of my papers rolling out in the 90s were just prolific policy papers. I started studying, I think even my PhD, I studied inflation, dynamics of inflation in Kenya. And that is work that is already published and even published in the IMF, dynamics of inflation process in Kenya. I've worked on exchange rate. And my teaching, of course, I have so many students because I joined a network of capacity building that is called African Economic Research Consortium. It was started in the 1980s, but it became full-fledged in 1988. The idea was that African economies rejected and protested structural adjustment policies in the 80s and the 90s. Not because they were wrong, it's because they were not well understood. And the thinking then was that, why don't we build capacity so that the policymakers can understand the content of policies? And that is where African Economic Research Consortium started. It started by providing grants for researchers to research in their own countries as long as there was policy content. In 1991, the thinking was that we are not increasing more disciples in this area. We need to go into graduate training and support public universities. So that's the program that started in 1993. And it so happens because it was in Kenya, it was bringing all the universities in the region and categorizing universities in terms of their capacity and their capability. So you can imagine we started with the collaborative master's program across Africa. So what we did was prepared, and I was part of the game, prepare a curriculum and give it to public universities to teach the curriculum and support that public university as a university with academic infrastructure. Academic infrastructure for the graduate students means a library devoted to students, a computer lab devoted to students, accessibility to internet devoted to graduate students, provide incentives to the lecturers because, again, to teach that curricula meant that you are in the frontier. And that is where we started, training Ndung'u students across Africa, across all universities. We started with Agrophone Africa, and we helped the Francophone Africa develop their own program.
To do their own.
To do a similar program, map it again with the similar.
Looking down the years, do you see like you succeeded in recruiting, what you're saying, you wanted to get more and more disciples into this cause?
Everywhere I go in Africa, and even in Kenyan institutions, I find my disciples. I find people who have been trained by the African Economic Research Consortium. We're still continuing. Let me say, by the time I was appointed governor of the central bank, I was the director of training in that organization. And I had now PhD students in masters in agriculture and applied economics, and students in masters in economics. Okay, and they were stretching for far. I remember in 2006, before I was appointed governor, I had 160 students meeting in Nairobi for masters, 60 students for PhD, and about 60 professors teaching them. You remember that? Remember that big complex in the KCB Management Center?
Yeah.
We had filled that place to the maximum, and it continued even now. Now, that's how I moved. By the time I moved to the central bank, I was actually coming from there. But my research work continued. I introduced new courses that were policy relevant. For example, we started training students in, for example, corporate finance and investment theory. And you can see most of the students that I trained were the first to go into this NSE, Nairobi Stock Exchange, the CMA. They were now pushing frontier. After that, of course, my training, I actually has taught most of the advanced courses in economic theory and econometrics. And if you look at my papers, most of them are applied econometrics. And but the research content is policy content. We have emphasized on that.
So you're a trailblazer. If we just could reduce it into all, you are looking ahead, seeing the situation today, and seeing how to push. There's something that you mentioned there. That the African Economic Research Consortium started, in the backdrop of the structural adjustment programs that were there in the late 80s into the 90s. There's talk that we're heading back into structural adjustment programs of a different kind. Is it true?
No, I think this is a continuous process. You have to realize when things start fading, there is something structural happening. Let me give you one indicator. When I was in the central bank, the tax to GDP was 22%. I even argued at the East African community level, as governors were arguing that we need a convergence criteria of tax to GDP. We call it a tax effort. To have a convergence criteria of 25%. Why? Because if you don't have adequate tax revenue, you cannot finance development. And everybody applauded. Kenya was at 22%. The other countries were lagging behind 14%. I've come back to the National Treasury to realize that we went down to 13.7%. There's no way you can move from 22% of GDP to 13.7% of GDP without a structural effect. That's why when you're talking about structural adjustment, it's actually saying, but you have a permanent effect here which you have to reverse. And the only way to reverse such an effect is to reform. So it's not structural adjustment error. It's actually reforming the institutions that have let us down.
What happened? Is it that our GDP was growing and our tax remains stagnant, or our tax revenues were stagnant? What was supposed to have happened that didn't happen?
There seems to be so many factors here. And one of the things is that when the taxable capacity is actually declining, there are two, of course, we look at it from different angles. Did the economy shrink? The question may be no. Did we actually have policies that pushed the market into the informal sector? It's something debatable. We have to do a lot of research work. And is it leakage? some amount of that is actually present, because I've come to the Treasury and realized that tax exemption is like an industry. And I'm sorry to say that, because I even made that comment. And the moment I made that comment, it was all over in the streets. I said, how can I make that comment in the office and all of a sudden everybody knows about it? The third component is that the economy has really been in a severe recession from 2016. Mm-hmm. But of course, I said it in around like 2017 or thereabout. But I think most people are not very kind. They did not take it positively. Mm-hmm. I argued that the economic recession was triggered. I think I must have said it in 2017 or there towards the end of 2017. Mm-hmm. And somehow I was looking at the real indicators. But let's go back to that. If you can only raise 13.7% of your tax revenue to GDP for tax revenue, it means that you are covering perhaps less than 90% of your total required revenues that should finance development, or your total budget, or the total expenditures. You're leaving a large proportion of it to be financed through debt or even grants, and even it becomes a little bit problematic, and you can actually start putting in different directions because those expenditures must be met.
Can you see, though, Waziri, even as you look at this, you mentioned institutions who should bear the responsibility for keeping these numbers up there. Which institutions are these, and what responsibility do they have in making sure that these numbers are up there? We talk about taxable capacity has declined over time. What are the indicators that point to what should be done to reverse that kind of situation?
When we talk about institutions, there are two things that we should realize in our own minds. The first thing is that the whole structure, for example, it's the failure of markets, because essentially it is in the marketplace that we push economic activity. And when institutions fail, they fail in two functions. One of them is the legal framework, or what in normal language you like calling it, the rules of the game. If you're not adhering to the rules of the game, the market will collapse. Just ask yourself, what happened to the coffee sector? I come from a region where we grow coffee, and my father invested in coffee in 1952. It was a livelihood. I almost missed school because of coffee. I could not get fees. On average, every time I would lose like 3 weeks to go and get fees from home. Now, how many households have been impoverished because of coffee? Just look at the second thing, and I would like you to even ask someone who can even give you some research work that has been done. The poverty that has engulfed the coffee regions is I don't even know how you can describe it. The word is profound. Profound. The word is profound. Thank you very much. Yes. Now, move from coffee, go to sugar sector. The story is even more devastating. Now, when you ask that question, we should actually say, where did we fail? Some of our sectors just collapsed. When they collapsed, what does it mean? People don't have income, and the government does not have tax revenue. Okay. You can do that to every sector. And you see the same story. The people who have really fought hard in their own sectors to retain their own sectors have managed to do that at a very high cost. So I'm coming back. I'm very market-oriented. I'm coming back to realize how bad things have gone. Let me go back a little bit, maybe to give your question a good content. In 2000. We started a work which was funded by USAID, and we wanted to write a book because the economy was contracting in Kenya in 2000. In 2002, that book was published. The title was Restarting and Sustaining Growth in Kenya. The whole issue, and journalists even then asked me, that time I was pushed by my vice chancellor to go and help start KIPRA in 1999. I was building the macro model. So I was at the frontier of research. everybody asked, why restarting and sustaining growth? It's because everything was contracting. The first chapter of that book was Restarting and Sustaining Growth in Kenya by myself. So they borrowed the same book. And you can see when Kibaki government started, they borrowed most of the work from there. And because I helped even developing the session of paper, I had to help. I was working with IDRC then. I had moved out of Kipra. That's why the title was Restarting Growth for Wealth and Job Creation. That's the session of paper. It was recognition that we had failed. We have to restart something.
Things were actually looking bad.
Yeah, they were looking bad.
Something needed to be done.
It needed to be
this
done.
particular time, though,
It's the same thing.
You're saying it's the same.
Yeah, it's the same thing, but we have now different facets that we need to attack. And that's why when I wanted to answer a quick question to her, I went straight to the markets and sectors. And we can go to the sector. Let me say this. If you destroy the markets, you destroy the economic returns. You even do not allow the investors to appropriate returns from their investments. Okay? So it means they can't invest.
Yeah.
So what is happening? If you can't walk, then all of a sudden you have to stay. Because if you can't go to the market, because the market is not going to provide you with what you really need. So we come back to the market, to the institutions. I started by saying the rules of the game. But the second one is that you have to actually sustain and redefine and protect the reward system. Period. And what is, for us, in economic terms, we say incentives. But incentives, what is incentives? It's actually the reward system. You are rewarded for doing well, but you are also penalized for doing the wrong things. A combination of the legal framework or rules of the game and an appropriate incentive mechanism is going to create prudent behavior in the marketplace. You are going to defend markets. They are not going to collapse. Today, everybody tries to restart the coffee sector, for example. It is difficult, but we have to manage it. You can see what we have done in the sugar sector, for example. The commissioning is much better. It's not privatization. Allows you to come in, bring in technology, and everybody will be happy. Protect the nuclear farms and make sure that the aggregation principle works very well. Let me go further and give you a point about the markets. Because our good example is because we are all small. Kenya has been known for smallholder, isn't it?
Yes.
Just give an example of a smallholder. Whether you are doing tea, coffee, milk, anything, okay? When you see the market working there, you look at the prices. It means that downstream where your farm is, you're going to increase production and you're going to look for all ways to increase productivity because you have seen the market is working. You deliver. Where our markets have been captured is when you interfere with the aggregators, with the aggregator, isn't it? The coffee was not destroyed at the farm level. It was destroyed at the aggregator level. Because if you cannot get returns, what happens? If you are milking your cow and delivering the milk to your dairy and to your cooperative, and they don't pay you at the end of the month, that cow needs to be fed. You start eating your assets. That is where we are really saying why markets work is because they give us that incentive that I'm going to sell. There is an off-taker of my product. But if that fails, it means everything fails.
Everything
your income
collapses.
levels, your income streams fail. Your investment, you cannot appropriate in terms for your own investment.
So this collapsing, Prof, was it as a result of bad policy, or was it as a result of good policy but poor management?
Policy did not change. We still are a country that has sustained policy. But the person implementing that policy, the person pushing the institutions to make sure the person pushing that market, that's the institution that should regulate that, making sure that it works, is the one who failed. The policy did not change. We did not change. You see, let's put it this way. We can change policy on the basis of what the market wants. So it's actually improve on production processes. But right now, there are two factors here. One of them is an interference in the market capture. This market capture, actually, you capture the market because you want to drain down the economic rent, or to, we are not, for me, where I sit, I can't use other names. I talk about illegal rent extraction.
Okay.
Economic rent extraction. Illegal economic rent extraction. So you are capturing the market to
just milk it.
To milk it. Then it means it's not that policy has changed. It is the structure. It is the institution that should preserve and regulate the market. But
who is this that would capture this?
Yeah.
And to what gain? Is it personal gain? Is it local? Is it external?
But who has the ability to even do that?
One of them is the political establishment. Sometimes it's political capture. And for different interest groups. Because interest groups are also political interests, isn't it?
Yes.
Because essentially what we're really saying is that how did you observe the coffee sector collapsing, the sugar sector collapsing? What factors can you attribute to? Because you wake up in the morning, you take coffee. You wake up in the morning, you put sugar in your coffee. So it means that there is a market. But the market still continues. It still uses coffee, it still uses sugar. But the sugar sector is not producing. So what could have happened? That's where the political economy of issues comes in. Who is capturing the market? Who is getting these economic rents so that the market cannot function? Okay? So at the end of the day, that's why I talked about institutions and the functionality of institutions. That's where the failure is.
So for those two things then to happen, for this capture to have taken place, whether it's political and all, there must be one, a beneficiary, and a deep-rooted and well-oiled and deep beneficiary.
Yes, that is what is capture. That is what the capture is all about.
What would it take to uproot this? And what are you doing about it?
You have seen His Excellency the Deputy President, how he has gone about in tea sector, in coffee sector.
He actually admitted that the cartels are...
That is the start of it. You have seen what we have done, and and even gone to Parliament, and actually the Parliament has approved about what we are going to do with the sugar sector. I've sat down with people from the sugar sector and explained the model, and they are all very excited. What do you protect? Can you just come and intervene in the production setup, the processing, the aggregation? And can you bring technology, and can you invest in the processing and productivity and leave everything else? And then we share the profits. That is an incentive enough. We need to do the same, and especially in the coffee sector, we need to do the same. But you see, the coffee sector is a totally different thing. When President Kibaki was president, when I was governor, I asked one question one time. How do you lose 300 bags of coffee in Iego at night? They are loaded into lorries, and there is no trace. You asked that question, now I'm returning your question and saying, can you tell me exactly what is happening here? Watchmen are loaded at night, tied somewhere, the coffee is loaded 300 bags, and you have no trace.
It disappears.
But I think the deeper question, Waziri, is that it's very clear that people are behind these things that we speak of, and they're not ghosts.
Yes.
They are human beings,
yes,
whether in the political sphere or anywhere else, and that they are known to other people.
Yes.
But then I prefer that there's a lackluster attitude when it comes to actually dealing with the problem, and then we will see these issues that we see today: dilapidated economy. We look at other economies at smallholder scale, falling through the cracks. People have burnt their coffee bushes because they say the cartels, which seems to be this amorphous thing that nobody can actually have a hand on, are ruining businesses. But then we go year on year, and the narrative remains the same. The cartels, political business is overtaking things, but then there is no desire to really want to deal with the issue.
There's no accountability.
There's no accountability.
There's desire now. That's why when we talk about it, when you talk, you see, you have also to understand each problem. For example, let me also go back a little bit. We have succeeded in tea. Why have we succeeded? Because somewhere, somehow, people put their food down. We have succeeded in milk, haven't we? Before that, it was actually going downhill, isn't it? But one by one, we are going to succeed. Now, the moment you see, that one of them was actually the political establishment that was protecting some of these people. And we have seen that in so many countries, for example, where we have seen everything going down, is the political capture. It depends on who captures the state. And it's going to be very difficult because we can talk about it, but if you are not going and mapping it out, I give you an example of just coffee being stolen, not actually even corruption, being stolen, and it disappears. The whole thing is, you ask yourself, what is happening? So
does it disappear or do people take it?
Well, the simple word is that nobody even traced it. The simple word. So, in a sense, what are we saying? The breakdown of law and order becomes a problematic. But for me, I wouldn't want to say the breakdown of law and order. I actually say that when you weaken the institution to the point where they cannot take action, then you realize that politicians have to come up and now start dealing with the issues. Because ideally, the deputy president is fighting a case where an institution should have done that. But he's now finding the institution is not doing anything. So the first thing is that waking up and firing the head of an institution does not help you. Waking up and getting the root of the problem and dealing with it directly. That is where it is.
And then re-empowering the
So you can imagine the few times we have tried to reform the sugar sector. We haven't managed. Why did we manage this time? Because we realized that create a corrective action platform and everybody will join in. Even today, we call those who are interested, who are in the coffee sector, those who are in tea sector, those who are in milk sector, and we say, we want a corrective action problem here. The second thing is that perhaps it's also going to be solved well when we talk about industrial parks at the county level. Because now we atomize, we create such centers in the county levels, not national centers. What are we really doing? We are going to use the relative comparative expertise and advantage of counties to actually shine in terms of what they have been doing. You can imagine, for example, how some sectors, some counties like Githunguri Dairy, for example, and so many others just push the frontier in milk production and showed that actually liberalization of the dairy industry can help. But they withstood all the test of time. And that is a good example of what you're saying, is that we are looking at it at a national level, but let's also go at the county level and create our own aggregation. And then let's create our own expertise at that level, because we have the resources. What they don't have, we have the inputs. What we don't have is the resources to restart the process and create a very better working environment.
So, Prof, you've given us a good background of the economy and where we are as a country. During all this conversation, one institution that comes into sharp focus is the National Treasury and how it has managed our fiscal policy. Getting to a point where our debt is a conversation that cannot escape everybody's lips. We have borrowed ourselves dry, as people have said, getting to a point of 10 trillion shillings. Question number one, can we account for each of the shillings that have been borrowed so far? Can we say that the 10 trillion shillings that has been borrowed, let's say 6 trillion in the last 10 or so years, has actually gone into areas it was intended to go?
Thank you very much. That's a very interesting question because, first of all, let me say, a forensic audit would be required for us to account for every shilling that is produced. But then we broaden the subject matter, because I like talking about developmental aspect, because that the forensic audit is somebody who is nicely going to give us information that we can use.
Yes.
But I think my debate, for example, is what debt does. Why do we borrow? And I think this is in 2021 December, I produced a special issue of Journal of African Economics in Oxford. The title was Growing with Debt in African Economies. And growing with debt in the development debate or development discourse is actually a very important subject matter. It actually, you can even relate it to Marshall Plan. The biggest problem is that and I think we used to argue about this so many times, is that it does not become the only game in town. Debt should not be the only game in town. Remember, during the global financial crisis in 2008-2009, we started saying that, okay, if you want to be the only game in town, you'll be the only game in town, but that game may not last long. So should not be the only game in town. It should supplement the resources that we don't have, but we borrow so that we effect some infrastructure. For example, development. We finance development.
Yes.
The bottom line is that the government should maximize. The role of government is to maximize the provision of public goods. But it has to finance those public goods. How tax itself flows cannot help us finance that, because tax flows, you are taxing, you are not getting that money upfront, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you are getting it over time. So in a sense, what you do is that contract debt, profile and target an investment that should be completed, and you can pay that debt over time. Let's look at it. What is the role of this project? Let me take infrastructure projects, because that's a subject matter that pushes to the development discourse. When you provide infrastructure in Africa and this part of the region in our country, they actually lower transactions cost. And that is a very important component. You have like Thika Superhighway, you have the trunk road to Moyale, you have the SGR, you have the expressway, okay? You have the trunk road all the way to Kakuma, isn't it? All these roads, and even they all help us reduce transactions cost, because in this part of the world, for example, the small and medium enterprises are transactions heavy. If you lower transactions cost, you're actually enhancing
growth,
profitability.
Yes.
Sure.
And that means you are actually helping private investment. So public investment in infrastructure allows private investment to come. We call it the complementarity channel. It is complementary. Public investment is complementary to private investment. And because our economies grow because of private investment, and public investment, which complements private investment, that is how the general growth and economic vibrancy is generated.
Okay.
So there is a very, very important aspect.
So,
but
6 trillion shillings in the last 9 years.
Yeah.
Has it had that effect? Can you look in our economy today and see that the 6 trillion shillings that we borrowed to inject into our infrastructure, into development, has actually spurred that complementarity coming from the private sector that has then grown our economy?
In the general sense, I would say yes. In the general sense. But in actual, if you go project by project, sometimes things don't work the same way.
Why?
Because one of them is, for example, if some project, there are two problems here. Some projects are displaced, to say the least.
What does that mean?
Everybody talked about, for example, look at the SGR going to where it stopped.
To Duka Moja.
Yeah, the biggest problem, the ambition was actually take it to Maraba border, let Ugandans pick it up from there, and then whoever else want to pick it from there, isn't it?
Yes.
And I can tell you, one time so many years back in the 1990s, I went one time to the World Bank. We were all talking about growth. And the Ugandans were presenting their research paper on growth, and there was the Mombasa factor, which was negative. It was a dummy. And I asked, what is the Mombasa factor? It's the punishment it imposes on the other landlocked economies. So in a sense, SGR could have hit
What
Maraba.
do they mean by punishment?
They're getting, you see, Mombasa is their gateway.
Yes, it is.
And if it's not efficient, it becomes a punishment.
Well,
So it has a negative effect on their their growth. That's the way they looked at it.
Right.
Yeah, because essentially it's their gateway,
Yes.
but it is so inefficient it punishes them.
It gets to the heart of the matter. I'm going to go back to the question that Eric is asking, but I'm going to tweak it a little bit. I could actually sit here and listen to you the whole day, because I like the way you postulate issues. I like the way you present it. But how do these wonderful things relate to the life of an ordinary citizen? Yes, infrastructure opens doors that nothing else can.
Yeah.
Direct benefits, one can talk of the Thika superhighway and one can even see benefits, and you can point and say, we can see.
Yeah.
Okay, but when one talks of very huge amounts that are mind-boggling, trillions for me, my mind doesn't conceptualize it very well.
Mm-hmm.
Should that not directly relate to, well, El Nino notwithstanding, to the Mwananchi actually having a better life?
Okay. Thank you. I wanted to relate to problems.
Yes.
Because I was asked the question about the benefits.
Yes.
One of them is the direct benefits of creating that opening up the economy.
Yes.
But the other one is actually the cost outlay of a project may impose heavy burden in terms of payment.
Mm-hmm.
Because essentially what we have realized, and this is again going to the story of our capture, was that most of those public investments were actually provisioned at very high cost. So it means that it's going to overburden your debt side. But even though the benefits are still there, it means that the payment period will be longer. That's the second one. But the third point I would like to say is that I think the point you are raising is that it's participatory work, participatory level. Is this the project that Kenyans would have taken up, would have desired to have? Was it consistent with what they wanted? And that is your dimension.
Yes.
The dimension is, and this is in a public choice theory, is to say that did we come in and say, is this what you really desire? Now, you have the road all right, but what you needed that particular time is piped water.
Yeah.
So what we do? So in a sense, what we're really saying is that the benefits are there. They may not be packaged the way the person wants, but in terms of stages in life, because in public choice theory, it says that I can do the road because you wanted it, but I will support you. Let me do the road this time.
And then I'll help you get your water.
But in the next period, I will vote for your water. And that is what public choice theory does. That's when you have an organized structure. But right now, we were just moving with projects that were actually deemed necessary at the time. But the question is, you are coming to the question was, did anybody vote for those projects?
You see, then there's the issue of opportunity, because what these things do is they provide opportunity. The road may not provide me with piped water, but it makes the process of getting that easier.
Yes. That's the complementary aspect.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Now, that complementarity then affords us a situation where livelihoods get better because you're able to do the things you wanted to do in a better way.
Yeah.
So even the debt burden that we speak of doesn't become that heavy because you are able to afford. Now, that's the good life, the better life I was speaking of.
Okay, that is also the life I wanted to say. Why are we investing in this? If we are opening up and we are allowing private investment to come in, it means we are raising the vibrancy of the economy.
Yes.
It also means that we are now going to generate income through contributory taxation here, because economic vibrancy allows taxation.
Yes.
And the government can finance more of those projects.
Yes.
That is how you can generate returns to pay for those loans. That's why I wanted to come to your point about the debt. And why I talked about the debt, the growing with debt in African economy, is because that is the development discourse that is required. But, of course, everybody ends up saying, is the debt sustainable? It would be sustainable if it is generating the same benefits that we are talking about.
Absolutely.
Did it create vibrancy? But of course, there are other factors that come in. But I can say that actually the way we look at it is not the quantum of how much debt we have. It is whether it is sustainable.
And I think that's one of the things, Waziri, because here we are looking at, right now, when we look at the economy, the game in town is the relationship that the Kenya's economy currently does have with its debt.
Yeah.
And the question is that in terms of revenue that's coming in for the country, the majority of that goes out towards the payment of debt. And it doesn't take somebody who is vast in economics to see the burden that will have on the country, as well as these individuals who should see the benefits of some of these development projects. It just does not exist.
Okay.
So now here we are asking the question that it is almost impossible to see the benefits from this burden of this huge debt for which Kenya is paying regularly and for which more is coming. One of the only ways that Kenya is allowed to borrow is for development.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that we cannot see the benefits of that development vis-a-vis the amounts of money that have been borrowed and that continue to be borrowed.
Okay.
How can we see that balance?
We took one aspect of development, financing development, borrowing to finance development. But I also made a very strong point about tax revenue to GDP dropping from 22% during Kibaki's time to 13.7%. That drop means that even recurrent expenditures had to be met through debt. That is where...
That's the reality.
That's the reality.
But the reality was hidden from the law.
That is explaining what is hitting us, because the moment you start taking debt into final consumption, you are on a very slippery path.
So we're breaking the law. The law is being broken.
No, you're not breaking the law, because essentially you have to finance expenditure. What you are really doing, sometimes it's a temporary issue waiting for things to improve. But in the period, we have also seen devastating consequences of pandemics. Just look at from 2020, I started saying from 2016 we have been in a recession. Then we are hit by COVID-19. When you are also in a recession, it pushes you further and further. Then the drought. Then of course the challenge, the geopolitical challenges that are coming in. You can imagine. Let me pick one example. Let me give you one of the works. By the way, I didn't finish the story where I went, but I also found myself in leading the African Economic Research Consortium. And of course, I mounted frontier studies and one of the examples I was actually working on is to understand how does African economies wake up or recover from the economic mess they are in. Economic recovery is going to be driven by what? Let me start by saying the first point I want to make is the study that we have covered on, which wants to link growth, economic growth, poverty reduction, inequality, and redistribution. And because of the way we were hit by so many devastating, should I say, negative shocks, we came to realize that actually strong growth is very, very important in eradicating poverty. But it has to be supported by targeted social protection programs that flatten inequality in the long run. That for us was very, very important analysis. So it comes back to saying you can ignite growth. And if you ignite growth and you have, for example, during COVID, the government constructed targeted social protection programs. It can work very well. So in a sense, we have to see that. But let me pick on, again, one negative shock, the drought. The drought has actually reversed. We have never seen a drought that has reversed all the efforts on poverty eradication. We have been pushed like 20 years back by the drought itself, inequality, and even social conflict because of natural resources. Yeah. So you can see that even though some of the paradigm, the way I was explaining how debt actually contributes to this development discourse, but there is now the factors that come in, the negative factors. That is, for example, the negative shocks. They reverse a lot of
what has been done.
What has been done
ends up being
but
reversed.
Also allows you to go into a period where, for example, during COVID, you have to actually lower even the tax rates. It means government gets less, but it has no revenue. It lowers levies, but it has no compensating revenues, and the donor effects were not coming through. Just imagine then what happens during the drought. This government came in a very devastating drought. The first thing was, what kind of resource, where can you generate resources even to help those people who are dying, save lives? It was very difficult.
You know what you just pointed out too?
Yeah.
We had a situation that required a complete rethink. Okay? So I'm asking the question, where are thinkers? Because you've outlined it well. These are daunting problems that will bring you to your knees.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean you can't think of ways of alleviating these things, or simply redoing everything you were doing and doing it differently?
Yes. And that brings me to bottom-up economic transformation agenda.
Oh, that's what we've got.
That is the rethinking.
That's the rethinking.
Because okay, no. It reflects the reality. It is someone who has seen, by the way, the reality is very clear. That's what you have just said. The reality is very clear. How do we reverse this? I pointed out, I wanted to point out one of the issues that I wanted to relate. One of the things in 2021, somebody asked me, what will take African economies to recover from all these devastating shocks? Do we require new rethinking? Do you require a new economic paradigm shift? And I said, no. It is actually refocusing on where we dropped the thread. You know, literature always told us that you'll be forced to go back to where you dropped the thread and pick it up. Okay? I started with simple things. Human capital development. Where did we lose it? Health, education, labor markets, nutrition. Those 4 issues are very, very important. It's a rethinking. Because I mounted a study in the African Economic Research Consortium on human capital development, and we focused on all those 4 things. It's because we realized that the African economies were going downhill. Today, the World Bank is generating a report that will be published in 2024, which is showing that middle-income countries are stagnating, and they have what they call a growth trap. They are actually stagnating. Now, let's go back to our case. Look at our manufacturing sector, a secular decline.
Yep.
Look at our export sector, a secular decline. Anything that you touch, there's secular decline. Now, so that's why I focused on human capital development, because if our human capital development is challenged, we cannot ignite economic transformation. For example, capital accumulation. Let me go back.
Prof, does it get our people to actually think? Let me ask the question, do we develop lateral thinkers? People who see, okay, this is what we've been thinking, this is what we've been doing.
I'll come to that because we also have more opposition in your thinking and the policy that you want to implement. More have been born that oppose everything that you do, and they go to court, and our courts are so happy
and they are
to support them. They are vibrant to support them. It's another paradigm we have to talk. That requires another day.
It's part of growth. But
let me come to the second point.
We'll continue with this, Prof, after the news. We need to get into the news, and then we continue the conversation.
Okay.
It's Professor Njuguna Ndung'u, who's our guest this morning. He is the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury and Economic Planning. We are talking about the state of our economy, everything from debt to growth.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.